November 7th, 2019. With the first order of business, we've had some changes since the recent election. And we have a new finance director who is Mr. Kevin Crumbo, who had intended to come today and make some remarks before this board. But he had a conflict and he couldn't be here this morning. But I would like to let you know that he will be coming to a future board meeting to address the board. And he has decided that he wishes for me to continue as chair of the Procurement Standards Board. Good. So I'm still here.
Great. Good news.
And then I would also like to welcome the new law director, Mr. Bob Cooper. And there has been some debate as to whether or not to address you as director or general or what have you. But if you would just take a moment and introduce yourself to the other board members, and we are thrilled about you joining us.
Okay, no, well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and discovering all sorts of things that come with this job that I didn't know about. But this looks like it should be a very interesting assignment, so I look forward to serving with you. I guess I'm now officially in my second day, so still learning the ropes here, and hope you will be patient with me as I get up to speed with what you're doing. So, good to be here.
Okay.
Welcome.
How you doing? Bob Cooper.
Don, nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
My apologies.
Okay, so thank you very much. So the first order of business that we have on today's agenda is approval of the minutes from August 27th. Those are provided in your packet. I'll give you an opportunity to review those if you need more time, or I will entertain a motion. Okay, I have a motion for approval. Do you have a second?
Can you give it to me so you need a few seconds for the minutes?
Okay, I'll give you a moment to review those.
Purposes of discussion, I'm happy to second. Not having been there, I can attest to their accuracy.
Okay, that's great. We have a motion and a second, but we'll give Mr. Harden a moment to review those. Okay. A motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved. Thank you. Next on the agenda is Ms. Michelle Hernandez-Lane. She will provide the purchasing agent report.
I have said this before, but it is true this time. This is probably the shortest purchasing agent's report that you all have seen from me. I don't have nearly the significant volume of information to present for this quarter. Again, we do continue to work with departments to assist them in meeting their goals and objectives through procurement activity. We have we've procured a variety of goods and services via RFP and ITBs for departments, and normally you all would see a report, a statistical report of that activity included in the key performance indicators to be presented by staff. However, we have been confronted with some systems transition challenges, as many of you will recall. We have implemented our Oracle e-business suite, which is an ERP basically for the city, and we have been confronted with a few issues that impacts our ability to fully provide you with the KPI reporting. We have decided to engage a manual process that is going to take a little bit of time, but we want to make sure that we provide you with as good information as we can about especially the life cycle, the average procurement days, as well as transaction days on projects, that we would normally be able to use some systems data to help generate, and we'll provide that to you at the next board meeting. There are some systems transitions issues related to R12, as well as with B2G Now on the BAO side that Christopher will talk about a little bit later that impact our ability to provide you with these KPI reports, accurate and complete SMBE utilization reports, as well as prompt pay detail, which is also reflected in the binders. Metro ITS has completed its installation of the R12 Oracle e-Business Suite. Again, just as a reminder, that's a full procure-to-pay supplier management integration, as well as a general ledger and financial module system. It's all combined. It went live on September 2nd. And as you'll recall, presented at the last staff meeting, there was quite a bit of work that was done on the procurement staff side in preparation for that installation, including significant and extensive systems testing, procurement activity modifications by the departments. This iSupplier database was scrubbed in preparation for the installation so that we would not be putting junk into our new home. Solicitation templates, again, have been modified to reflect appropriate changes, as have contract templates. We did use this as an opportunity to work with the law department, to work with ITS, to modify the clauses that are included in our standard boilerplate contract templates, as well as to include some additional information related to information security from an IT standpoint that impact procurement activity. So Keith Durbin was really clear that we needed to update, based on some changes that they've made in IT, some of the information security information or data that's in our contracts and in our solicitations. So since we were having to update templates, we did it all pretty much at the same time so that we could start under the new systems with updated contracts and updated solicitation templates reflecting all necessary changes. As can be expected with any major systems implementation, the process hasn't been just 100% smooth. It hasn't been without its challenges. I think if you talk, depending on who you talk to, they're going to give you, a different response about the level of that challenge. But Metro ITS continues to work out the implementation issues that are related to the system. And from my perspective, we see daily improvements in some of those areas of systems limitations. There do remain a few open items, which, lay folks would look at and consider kind of service ticket kinds of things with Oracle that are related to, some systems issues of PDF generation, which we rely very heavily upon, as well as workflows, and we hope to have a resolution to those issues very soon. During the last quarter, we engaged, I'm sorry.
Can we just pause there?
Sure.
I just want to see if there are any questions specifically around this portion of your report from the committee in terms of R12. Yeah.
Just curious about, you get a new system, you rely on it, and it breaks down, and we have a backup plan to at least, hopefully it wouldn't hold up procurement activity and reporting, I guess we can deal with, but you have a backup plan as far as this R2 server, R12, and Oracle and all that.
You may recall at, I don't remember which meeting it was, I think it was probably at the June meeting. The chair asked that we ensure that we had a backup plan in the event that when the system went live, we ran into some specific issues. What we did was prepared before the system's implementation or installation date of September 2nd as it relates to actual solicitations to be issued. So we really had primed our departments to get them ready and say, look, the system, there's going to be a system blackout period. You're not going to have access to it. Let's get a game plan together for every solicitation that comes. And then during the 2-week period of the blackout, if there's something that you specifically need, if it rises to the level of what could be considered an emergency, then we had a plan for how we handled those. There were 4 emergency PO requests that we did issue during that period, and we did it manually. We issued paper POs. And then we caught the POs up afterwards. So we did have a process in place. We did run into some issues very shortly after the go-live period with the issuance of solicitations. But again, those solicitations didn't run into, they were not emergency kinds of situations. So we did have a couple of weeks delay before we could actually issue the solicitations, but it didn't negatively impact. I mean, you know, folks want things done quickly and quicker.
Stuff happens,
But it
right?
wasn't, you know, oh gosh, if we don't get this solicitation on the street, it's gonna mean this kind of
Do
thing.
you feel like you're at a point now with normal workflow coming through?
We are issuing
That's what I'm saying.
solicitations without problem. There
Okay.
is, the only issue, again, it is around workflows. We do run into some of those issues, especially when it comes to, you know, having staff out and they use the delegation function in the system. It does create kind of an issue, and they have to go in
The
and manually.
routing, you're talking about just the routing.
They have to go in and manually make a change, and that is one of those outstanding issues that ITS has with Oracle, so.
Cool, thank you.
If I could just make a request, actually, for, at some point, that the departments are surveyed on the impact of the rollout and whatever they view as outstanding concerns or issues related to the system itself.
Okay.
I think that that's important because the view from this side is not always the view from the departmental side in terms of overall impact to our ability to conduct business in the way that we need to.
I think we'll get,
Share
we'll get
that with Dawn
we'll
at
get
the
that-
steering committee.
Yeah, we'll get that message back to the steering committee.
Okay, anything else on that?
I just wanted to pause there. Okay.
During the last quarter, the purchasing division engaged in a significant volume of procurement activity. We can tell you we processed 14 requests for proposals and 19 invitations to bid during that time. Of specific interest were the following major procurements. We completed contract number 455783, which was with WatchGuard for the body-worn cameras and in-car camera system with an initial contract value of $19 million. That was for the police department. Terry.
Michelle, is that a 5-year number for the entire 5-year contract or
That-
just year one?
That is the 5-year contract value that we have included there. I mean, that does not mean, of course, that, you know, there might not be a need to amend it, but that was the initial 5-year contract value.
Okay.
Terry actually was the buyer on all of these major procurements that we have. And I would like to note that Terry is now Terry Ray.
Yeah, I was assuming.
Yeah, so as you
Oh,
see Terry Ray, that is our old Terry Troop.
Okay, right.
And Terry is actually out of the office today. She's on scheduled time off today. We had 8 offers that were submitted. I would note, of course, with 1 award, and there was no SMWB participation on that. I would like to note that this was a lengthy procurement process for this solicitation. It included 4 rounds, and we received and we engaged in a good deal of planning before we issued the solicitation in an effort to ensure that we'd have a comprehensive, complete process that would minimize the potential for protest, honestly. It included 4 rounds. We had an initial qualification round. We had a technical response round. We had a 3-month field trial round in which we had identified officers who tested using the same testing scenarios, all of the equipment. And we also had a final cost round. So it consisted of 4 rounds, and it took a significant amount of time to complete. But again, we have a completed contract, and I'm excited about the fact that they protest and fight over quite a few things, but nobody protested this one. So, and we did get some good feedback from all of the vendors who bid in other markets, speaking to our process. So they thought it was a good process.
So that you had 8 proposers. Is this contract it's a 5-year deal? Is it all supplies and service, or is it renting? Are we renting equipment, or is it?
It's the purchase of equipment, it's maintenance, it also includes warranties. There's some integration elements of it. IT was involved in that process as well. So it's a pretty comprehensive contract that should meet the needs of the department, of the police department, to be able to deploy body-worn as well as in-car cameras.
Okay, I'm curious, was this did the lower bidder win, or was the better product? Do you have any idea about that?
I'm sure I did at one point because I was very actively involved in the contract negotiations, which we ended up saving a significant amount of money at the end of the day on this, but I don't remember exactly how the cost bids came in. I'd have to kind of go back and look at that round of the RFP.
Okay. Cool, thank you.
But as is with any RFP, Macy's probably like, don't say it, Michelle, I always say it. It allows us to engage, an RFP allows us to engage in comparative evaluative judgment. And so we're gonna be looking at the cost, but that is not the only factor that is of importance to us. So we are looking at a number of different things, and then as we engage that first round, we culled, folks who didn't make the cut based on the criteria that were established in the RFP didn't go to the next round, and they were so notified.
Did any of the original 8 offers have a small business or minority component?
I don't recall there being any minority
from
business.
any of the proposals?
I don't recall it.
Okay.
I don't recall it. Do you know who worked that in BAO? I don't think we even had any programmatic application to it, Talia, based on availability.
It's a specialized situation.
It's very specialized.
It's but when you just see the fact here and no participation, I think we need to make sure we put that in context of
Right.
availability.
They knew you were gonna ask, though.
No, they didn't. They never
You
know
learn to
what
be
I'm gonna-
prepared for whatever with Talia. She's, you don't know what she's going to ask. You just know she's going to ask something, which is a good thing. That's good. The next one is contract 456463 for KCI Technologies, and I'm sorry that there's an error in the very next one because that contract number should be 464. But these two were solicited under the same RFP. One is for KCI Technologies and the other is for Woolpert. And this is for the CityWorks and ESRI implementation, configuration, and support services. This contract is used, and we were operating previously under a process whereby we had not solicited these services. I don't know exactly how we were engaged with them, but we did solicit very specifically these services. I don't know if it was a sole source previously, but we did solicit these, and these services are used by the Information Technology Services Department, by planning for some of their GIS mapping work, as well as by water services. So it was in our best interest to be able to solicit this, have a contract in place, and be able to kind of negotiate pricing on these so that we could formally correctly meet the needs of the various departments that use. Again,
If I could add some background to this one, we previously had multiple contracts with departments for this ESRI, particularly this ESRI licensing. And the ITS department actually did an analysis and worked with ESRI for us to come up with a Metro-wide contract that all departments could access. And that would ensure that we had proper licensing on all of our computers and databases, and we didn't have any conflicts there, and we could get better pricing by having a single Metro-wide contract. So ITS took the lead on doing the analysis and working with the departments to get all those contracts consolidated. So this was really a cost-saving measure as well as an efficiency measure for the government. It's kind of like Microsoft. Back in the day, every department would kind of go out and buy their own computer, and then they'd have a Microsoft license, and we didn't have an enterprise license. So there would be this thing where we would have to go out every year to make sure that every computer in the city was properly licensed. So instead, we ended up buying an enterprise-wide Microsoft Office license to make sure that all of our computers in the city were covered. So we similarly did this on this ESRI contract.
and with this one, there were 3 offers and 2 awards that were made. And we saw 20% SBE participation proposed on these and 15%. I'm pretty sure it was minority business. I've got MWBE here because we use that term kind of, together, but I'm pretty sure it was minority business specifically participation on it.
2 companies got virtually the same scope of work.
Mm-hmm.
They just kind of split up by departments or.
I'm not sure how ITS is going to deploy their use of it, but I know that they needed to award to 2 to ensure that they had significant or had the sufficient coverage for all of the metro-wide needs. We had an appeal of an RFQ that we issued for the purchase, installation, and maintenance of fitness equipment. I believe at the last board meeting, I reported the protest on this. It was also appealed and heard by the appeals board, and the appeals board upheld the determination of the purchasing agent on that one. There's also been a protest of an RFQ for pouring rights for non-alcoholic beverages. That is, honestly, every year, do you know about it? Every year, not every year, but every 5 years, we solicit pouring rights, and it's always Coke and Pepsi, of course, who bid on it. And that's one of those items that we typically can pretty much count on there being a protest. This is non-alcoholic beverages, specifically for 3 departments, for the municipal auditorium, for Metro Parks facilities, as well as the fairgrounds.
How do you solve it? Blind taste test.
It's interesting that you say that, because the crux of the protest was our brand is better. That was the crux of it. So, but that one is has been protested. During the last quarter, any questions on that before I go on?
Did that one make it to the appeals board last time?
It hasn't been.
I'm talking about the last time. You said it was protested the last time.
Oh.
Did it make it to the appeals board? I'm just curious.
I don't know, Talia.
Have they changed their formula since then?
It's been a long time since the formula was changed. Okay, so on staffing, I am just tremendously excited to say that staffing during the last quarter remained steady for the purchasing office specifically. We are fully staffed, and we have not had any additional turnover in the office. The Business Assistance Office has brought 2 new staff members on, consistent with the funding appropriated by Metro Council for the EBO. We did have 1 employee that left, and then we had 1 new employee per the EBO funding. And I'll defer to Mr. Christopher Wood later to discuss the addition of Ms. Victoria Norfleet.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And Mr. Cedric Irvin Jr. right down here at the end. All right, so BAO staff continues to work to promote increased DB utilization and city purchases. Again, the DB utilization report is not included as noted before. However, Mr. Wood is going to provide the board with a high-level summary at the end of this report of preliminary efforts related to the Equal Business Opportunity Program. And our Business Development Officer, Mr. Val Watson, will provide you with highlights of the business development and outreach activities for the quarter as well. I would like to just note for the board that there's been a significant uptick in the numbers of open records requests related to procurement activity. I think it's important just to note that because that, of course, doesn't just affect us. I mean, we have to turn everything over to legal. Legal reviews it, redacts it as necessary, et cetera. It does take potentially a significant amount of time. But of course, we're going to provide the records as requested and consistent with the law. Most of those requests have been largely centered on projects at the Nashville Fairgrounds, but there have been some other requests included as well. So we've had a significant number of those that we've worked on. I would like to note also, and Macy, tell me when I'm wrong, but additionally, board members may recall that there was an appeal that was reported to you at the last board meeting of the parking modernization project. The board upheld the determination of the purchasing agent in that appeal. The appealing party subsequently took it to Chancery Court, and the final ruling by the court was in favor of the appealing party. So just as an FYI, there's kind of that process on these procurements where it's protested, the protest is heard, it can be appealed, the appeal is heard, the next, the next legal right available to the appealing party is to go to Chancery Court, which they did, and Chancery Court ruled that the solicitation should be thrown out. So the ruling requires that the solicitation be thrown out, and should the city so decide, be re-procured. So that's just an update on that. Finally, and this really kind of flows into this next item on the agenda, the newly confirmed finance director has requested that we develop a comprehensive plan for review and update of the procurement regulations. And pursuant to that request, we will begin the process of identifying folks who could serve on a committee to review and make recommendations, which would then be instructive to the update of the procurement regulations. And I guess that the Procurement Standards Board, of course, is able to appoint or designate a committee. According to the procurement regulations, the purchasing agent may also develop a committee of folks to look at various topics. So I would certainly look to the board's input on the development of that committee and folks that they think should be included in that. The finance director has requested that we consider these updates in categories indicating level of effort to complete the update and other regulatory impacts. So we can't just kind of go about making changes to the procurement regulations when there's a subsequent impact or maybe limitation based upon the procurement code or et cetera. So we need to look at all of that and then make a determination on which items are, for lack of a better term, kind of low-hanging fruit, things that we can do relatively quickly. Best practice shows us that we should be doing it and that we should be making those changes versus other changes that may have a more far-reaching impact that would require other action prior to the change of the regulation. So the idea there is to ensure that we have kind of a broad roadmap, if you will, for which items we're going to be making initial changes to, and also looking at a continuous process, because we should probably be reviewing the regulations on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're always in line with best practice. So
I have a question. This working committee, are you proposing a separate working committee to do this analysis, then to bring it to a subcommittee of this board? Or are you asking that this board create a subcommittee to work on this project? Which are you asking?
I'm saying that both options are allowable. So the purchasing agent could designate a committee, but the Procurement Standards Board could also develop a subcommittee of folks here. And I think it would probably be a very good idea for the purchasing agent to develop a committee that was inclusive of maybe someone designated by this board, but I don't want to assume what the board's thinking would be as well on it.
And I can't speak for the whole board, but I would think that this board would want to receive something to
Yes.
comment on rather than to create the documentation in terms of what we believe to be appropriate, but to provide us something to at least consider. I'd like to hear from everybody else on this approach, or whatever approach you might think.
I would
We need to
agree with
follow.
what you just stated, but my ask is always going to be,
To have someone from
there's
the
a committee
departments.
that the
Right.
departments are represented, and not just the large departments, but departments who have various functions within the government be included on any committee that you would have.
So maybe this board would approve the composition of this committee?
However you
Yeah.
think is.
That might be something we could consider. I'd like to hear from you all.
Yeah,
Sounds reasonable.
Okay. What do you guys think?
I agree with that. I think it definitely needs more outside input or inclusive of person or persons from the outside that has that expertise along with the group that you're assembling, and not really just us listening to our own tunnel, if you will.
I definitely think we should be conscientious of, the roles that those outside folks might, serve. You could run the risk of folks who are part of the vendor community being engaged in some way that might not be, as appropriate as we think in the development of procurement regulations. But I definitely think that, folks from the user departments who are impacted by the processes that we establish, having some input would be beneficial. maybe, folks from, NIGP or different organizations that serve government purchasing professionals would be a consideration as well.
Can we consider that today? I mean, this board doesn't meet except quarterly, and we'd have to reconvene to kind of prove not individuals, but who we would want to be represented on this working committee. I'm going to turn to our attorney, Ms. Ege, and see if we could take any action to kind of approve, the types of people we would want to make sure that they were represented on the committee, such as Dr. Kroom said. We would want to make sure there's, it's very simple, department representation on the committee. That we would want a professional association, independent professional association representative. Who else? And of course, the purchasing staff would staff the committee. I don't know that I'd want you all to be members of the committee, but to staff the committee.
Yeah, I would also.
Just whatever, I'm just brainstorming here.
I'd also add that I'm just, trying to reread this paragraph, and trying to understand the objective.
Did I do a poor job of writing the paragraph?
No, it's fine,
Okay.
but you couldn't really write the objective in a document like this. You kind of gave us the overview, but I would want it to be, the objectives to be defined, so it's not a rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's got an end game to it. It's like, it says review and update, but is that ongoing? Is that one time? Is that we reviewed it, we just kind of got a fresh look, but not like a rabbit hole, if you will. Fair, but not a rabbit hole. It's just my thoughts.
Sure.
I was involved in this conversation, and I think the conversation had to be, the question was, when is the last time that Metro took a comprehensive look at its procurement regulations, top to bottom? And if we did that, how would we go about kind of just taking a fresh look at all of the procurement regs to see what needs to be updated? So I do think it's very broad.
What was the answer to that question?
I don't know that there has been a comprehensive review since.
Not from top to bottom.
Yeah.
And Ms. Eke was also involved in that conversation, and I think she shared with the director that was going to be a pretty heavy lift, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, only because the procurement regulations track the procurement code.
Mhm.
So you actually have to, it involves looking at the procurement code and seeing what's consistent with the code, what you can change under the code, because since you cannot vary the regulations in a manner that's inconsistent with the code. So it's it's a big project.
Yeah. So maybe the first step isn't to form the committee, but to come up with a scope?
That's what I would think. That's what I would
To
think.
define, a more defined scope.
I would agree.
And we could take that on, and if we need to do a special call meeting, just so that we can proceed with starting the analysis before, 3 months or 3 or 4 months, we could reconvene this committee to kind of approve that.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sounds fair.
Yes.
Okay. You look like you're interested in this.
As I said, I'm learning.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Is that okay? Is that enough, Michelle?
That is.
So you ready to pass the baton? Okay.
Thank you all. So first, I'd like to introduce the staff Michelle spoke about. So the 2 new compliance staff members that we do have are Cedric Urban. Cedric comes to us from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, where he did EEO, Human Rights Compliance, for the Commonwealth. So he comes to us from there. And then we have Victoria Norfleet, who comes from us from the city of Memphis. And the city of Memphis has a minority business program, and she worked in it from the department side of doing procuring. So they're behind us.
Mhm.
All right. So due to the conversion of R12 and the continuous modifications that Michelle mentioned to ensure the accuracy of our data during the first quarter, we're unable to provide an accurate report regarding our diverse business utilization. However, what I'd like to do is provide an update regarding the Equal Business Opportunity Program, and that is the document which you all see in front of you. The Equal Business Opportunity Program is both recommendation number one and the most important impactful tool of our efforts to create more equitable and inclusive purchasing. The EBO was launched on July 5th, 2019. In the first quarter of FY 2020, there have been 18, do you have the chart?
Oh, they're looking for an actual report.
Yeah, we were trying to see if what you
No,
were
it's
saying
on-
was here.
It's on the, that sheet right there.
Okay.
Oh, I thought it was over.
I thought you
We all
were.
went
I'm-
immediately here. I apologize.
I'm just ramping up to give you all the numbers. Alright. So, in the first quarter of FY 2020, there were 18 solicitations which had race and gender conscious goals. Based on this, the results are promising. It was 14.8 million total estimated spend with minority and women-owned businesses. That breaks down to 6 million with minority-owned businesses, 8.8 million with women-owned businesses. The average combined goal for each of those 18 solicitations is 13%. That is 6% average goal for minority-owned businesses and 7% average goal for women-owned business participation. By comparison, in the previous fiscal year, the total participation rate for minority and women businesses combined was 6%. As you can see, based on these numbers that I just presented to you, thanks to the tools provided by the EBO, Metro is already on track to double if our current trend holds.
I think it's important to note on these that these are all estimates based upon based upon the established goals and the participation proposed. So I really want us to manage expectations. But, we're coming out of the gate with a full, understanding of what the impact of the EBO can be on our procurement activity.
Is there any overlap between these two categories? What if you have a minority woman-owned business? How does that get counted?
They can only, I'm sorry.
So, based on the way the program is set up, subcontracted program, and if a business does have, let's say, dual certification, if I understand, you're asking if a company certified as a woman-owned business and a minority-owned business, they can only count towards meeting one of those goals.
Okay.
So as a prime contractor's putting their offer together and they're determining what they're using, when they reach out to that company that may have dual certification, they're either going to count them as a minority business or a woman business.
And if I could,
Yeah. So you can add those up, but I guess there could be some minority-owned businesses that are also women-owned businesses, but just didn't use that criteria as
Right.
part of the process, and vice versa.
Correct.
Okay.
just to kind of clarify it a little, we determine your status as a minority-owned or woman-owned business based upon your certified status. Certifying entities are going to certify you as either a minority-owned business, tell me when I'm off the track, Javelle, or as a woman-owned business. So they're going to present as part of their registration their status as either of those, and then their participation would be noted based upon that.
Right.
So they wouldn't be a minority and woman and being able to kind of dip into both of those buckets.
Right. Okay, thanks.
You're done.
This is great news, I think, already. It started in July, right? And this is,
July 5th.
we were all trying to figure out when we can start counting the new program, even though it may still be early to really figure out, well, how did you really achieve this? What is working, what is not working? If you knew some of that, that'd be great, but I wouldn't expect you would know that just yet, or would you, right?
Right,
It's
I
kind of
mean,
a question.
that's why they're kind of projections based upon the procurement activity. Then the contract compliance staff will begin receiving actual, tracking pay information, et cetera, so that we can look at what's proposed with the actual overtime.
And I'm assuming that once we actually know the annual, we'll have a real year comparison, because you can't compare quarter to
Exactly.
an annual.
That's right.
Because the number of solicitations that might be involved, but as you go forward, we'll be able to have a better sense.
I think the idea with that presentation of that number was just to kind of say, if we keep on the same track, we're going to be significantly beyond what was achieved in the entirety of a year. last year.
We didn't have those goals last year.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay. I don't know who would be appropriate to do this, but before we move on, there's somebody else in the back that needs to be introduced.
Kevin?
Oh, okay. I would like to introduce
Yes,
Ms.
that may
Nicole
be
Whitlock.
appropriate for Michelle to
Oh,
to do
okay.
that.
All right, thank you. So you all will recall that when we presented the staffing projection for the EBO implementation, we talked about a procurement accountability officer. Ms. Nicole Whitlock is our procurement accountability officer. And there's some going on with the state of Tennessee, the state of Kentucky, because we have 3 people related to our EBO program who've come to Nashville from the state of Kentucky. But Ms. Whitlock is working in our Office of Financial Accountability. That procurement accountability officer is responsible for doing a variety of investigations related to the Equal Business Opportunity Program, as well as our small business programming, and looking generally at some of our procurement actions. And the idea of her being located with Kevin Brown and with Fred Adam over in the Office of Financial Accountability is to ensure that we have someone who's kind of impartial and outside of procurement, taking a look at some of these issues, but working with us to ensure that we're reaching the outcome intended. So we're excited to have her here and to have her on board after a lengthy search for a candidate, for the best candidate for that position. And I'm thankful to Kevin Brown and to Fred Adam for, of course, working directly with her and providing her that audit guidance that I certainly don't have. I know how to respond to audits since I've had 4.
And
But-
independence.
Yes, and to maintain that level of impartiality and independence.
So she's going to be an important key to this program, so that, and the reason that occurred to me is so that when we start putting these numbers out there, that we can go back and validate these numbers at a future point in time, that they are accurate.
All right, welcome
Okay.
aboard.
Okay. Ready to pass the baton? Okay.
If everyone here will return to the video report. As stated, this is a high-level view. I think the top 3 things that I would like to point out here is that I presented to you a couple of the trainings, workshops, events that we have been participatory in. I would like you to note that there have been over 23 hours worth of trainings, workshops, and events. If we listed all the events and trainings and workshops that we do or that we're asked to be involved in, this would be a full page. The top 3 things I'd like to note is that we, the Metro Business Assistance Office, was nominated for a partnership award for the regional office of WeBank South. That was very key. It was collective of 4 states, and we were the only organization out of Tennessee that was elected or nominated. We did not win, but we were nominated, which I thought was a key point. The other thing that I would like to point out is that the U.S. Department of Transportation picked to work with us to provide a bonding capacity academy for next year, which is really good because they're providing it at their cost. They've done them multiple times throughout the region, but not one has been done here in Tennessee. So moving forward, that's a big component. And I think lastly, I would say through the direction of Zachary Kelly, we started a relationship with the Nashville Community Education, and we've been able to foster that relationship into flurrying to have trainings with them each quarter, which has allowed us the opportunity to have reach and touches of individuals that don't typically work with Metro or find out information about the opportunities of programs and trainings that we had. So I would say to you that out of all the trainings we've had with them, and we have approximately 3 or 4 each, what they call their semester, for each class we may have 1 person that is involved in Metro work. So that's really good when you look at the classes, and most of those classes are packed. We're looking at 20 people or more. To have 1 person that's already been involved with Metro, we're touching people citizens within our city that don't normally get touched. So I think hats off to Zach for making sure that is started and continued, but that has been a really good point that I wanted to make to the committee.
Congrats on that program.
You also have the numbers here of the approved MWBEs and SBEs that we have for the quarter.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that?
Just, I think the question I generally have with trainings is whether or not we actually survey the people that we train after the fact, and if so, at some point, if we could kind of see the results from your survey questions.
By all means, we survey them after each training, outside of the one, NCE surveys their attendees. When we do.
NCA, Nashville Community
Yes, I'm
Education.
sorry,
for
Nashville
those
Community
who-
Education. They do survey each attendee. We also survey our attendees when we have in-house trainings per se, like when they're over in the Howard office building. And we actually did a survey, I want to say it was EBO training, B2G Now training, because it was one of our more attended trainings. I think we had approximately 70-some people there, and we wanted to get an idea of the trainings that they needed, the value that they find out of our trainings, how to best be contacted and things of that nature. So we can provide those results. But we do survey them all the
During
time.
the year, I mean, we don't have to have it often, but just, it would be interesting to know what the feedback is on the training.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Okay.
It's included.
It's
It's,
included here.
the prompt pay report is not the more in-depth report that you're accustomed to, and we talked about that at the beginning of the meeting, but Fred Adam and Kevin Brown have provided us with some highlights related to the prompt pay for the quarter.
Okay. The next item on the agenda says procurement regulations modification.
That is specific, or was specifically related to one additional item that is not prepared or ready for the board to consider, but it is in line with, our whole-scale review of the regulations. This is related to the selection process that does require final review from legal before we can present it to you. It has had an initial review from legal. They've given us some feedback on it, and it does require now a final review from legal before it can present it to the board.
Okay, great. We don't have any committee reports, correct? Okay. Unless there's any other business, our next meeting date is February 13th, 2020, unless convened before then to consider the other item.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do you need a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Okay, we're adjourned. They can't get out of here quick enough. Yes, you were.